Namaste. Today we have with us Professor Bart D. Ehrman, the world-renowned expert on the New Testament and the history of early Christianity. Dr. Ehrman has authored or edited 30 books, numerous scholarly articles, and dozens of book reviews, in addition to writing several textbooks for undergraduate students and trade books for general audiences. 6 of Professor Ehrman's books have been on the New York Times bestseller list. And those are Misquoting Jesus, God's Problem, Jesus Interrupted, Poached, and How Jesus Became God. His books have been translated into 27 languages. To talk about his academic journey, after completing his Master of Divinity and PhD at Princeton Seminary, he's had a long and accomplished teaching career. He mentions his students a lot in his writings and talks, and so I presume he loves what he does, both writing, educating, and teaching. I mean, I'm differentiating between educating and teaching because I clearly see a lot of difference between these two, because educating is what he'll be doing to us today and teaching is what he does in the university setup. So namaste, Professor Ehrman. Welcome to Sangam Talks.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You have recently written a book called Armageddon, What the Bible Really Says About the End. So let me begin by thanking you for penning such a complex topic in such easy language. To give you a perspective of what I mean, easy language is I read it over a weekend. And very gripping, not just the language, very gripping, some very complex topics. You have really broken it down. So one does not have to be a student or scholar of Christian studies to understand what you're actually saying. But I have to tell you, when understood and accepted, Dr. Ehrman, your book is going to disappoint a large section of the Indian population. And I'm talking about the gullible, vulnerable, poor Hindus that have been converted to Christianity with the lure, among other things, of a certain mighty and just savior coming down to earth or returning to earth to judge and punish all those evil people, the rich, the elite, the socially, economically privileged people, all those people that they think have oppressed them. And it is, you are going to break their heart that there isn't going to be an event like that, and that they abandoned their civilizational identities and even turned into anti-nationals for nothing. I mean, don't even get me started on the fury and outrage that the Christian leadership in India is going to bring down upon you. Something like, there shall be gnashing of teeth, and they will pour out their wrath upon you and spend their anger against you. Remember that verse from Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 8, to be precise. So I'm actually talking about those that have made a career, a fortune, and fame by peddling this lie. And I give it, some of them are honestly ignorant, but most of them know that there is no Jesus coming back. But still, that is the line used to get more and more Hindus into Christianity. So that in a nutshell is what is actually happening in India. And so this conversation, Dr. Ehrman, is a very important one for India. And there could be no better time, trust me, than this for your book. So thank you once again for writing it for us. So,
well, you're welcome. It sounds like I better not take a lecture tour in India anytime soon.
So coming to the book itself, I want to summarize it in one sentence, and you can correct me if I got it wrong. So in summary, you're saying that Jesus is not coming back, and that the belief in Jesus's imminent return is largely based on a problematic reading of the book of Revelation. Why do you say that?
So it's important for me to try and clarify what I'm trying to do in the book and what I'm not trying to do. For your listeners, you know this, but for your listeners, I'm not a theologian. I'm not one who is an expert on what God is going to do, because I don't believe in God. I'm also an atheist, and so I can't prove that Jesus is not coming back. What I can do is I can say that that's not what the Bible says, and the Book of Revelation is not about what in American fundamentalism is talked about as the rapture, that Jesus will come and take his followers out of the world before a 7-year tribulation period appears, where there'll be horrible suffering on earth prior to the millennium. My point is in this book is that this is not at all what the Book of Revelation teaches. It's not teaching about our future, and that none of the Bible is teaching about our future. And so when conservative Christian readers, theologians and preachers and evangelists use the Bible in order to scare people into thinking that they need to repent because Christ is coming back any day now, that's a misuse of the Bible. It's a misunderstanding of what the Bible is really teaching.
Okay. So you're saying that Revelation was not written as a prophecy of what would happen in the 21st century. Well, I'm quoting it from your book. And you say that it was written by an author in the first century who was addressing readers of his time.
That's right.
And he's actually telling them a message, what they needed to know about their own generation, about the things that were going to happen in their own generation. Is that right?
Yeah, it'd be like if you have a modern preacher today in India, for example, who is saying that Jesus is coming back soon, and you need to be ready for him to come. If you have somebody saying that today, he's not thinking that this is a message for somebody living 2,000 years from now. He's thinking it's a message for his people today. And that's exactly what John was doing. John was writing for people in his own day. He tells us this explicitly. He tells us that he's writing to 7 churches in Asia Minor, which are modern Turkey. So on the western coast of modern Turkey. And these are the people he's addressing. And so when he says that Jesus is coming soon, he's telling them 2,000 years ago that Jesus is coming soon. He's not talking to 21st century.
Is this the same John as the Apostle John?
Well, no. So there are several complications here. Even in early Christianity, there were debates about which John this is. The Book of Revelation claims to be written by John, somebody named John. John was a common name in ancient Judaism. Lots of people named John. The Gospel of John, interestingly, does not claim to be written by somebody named John, but people have assumed that it was written by John, the son of Zebedee, Jesus' disciple. Most scholars don't think that that's right. Most historical scholars don't think that John, the disciple, wrote the Gospel of John. But whoever wrote the Gospel of John did not write the Book of Revelation. These are 2 different authors. This was recognized even in early Christianity. In the 3rd Christian century, we have a church father who did a careful analysis of the language of the Gospel of John and the Book of Revelation. And he showed definitively that this is not the same writer. And that's the view that virtually everybody has still today. So whoever wrote Revelation did not write the Gospel of John, and neither one of them was John, the son of Zebedee.
You talk about another prophetic book, Daniel, which is claimed to be a prophecy. And you say that the book talks about things that had taken place long before the time of writing the book. And you have debunked 2 of the most important prophetic books of the Bible. The question is, are there prophecies in the Bible at all?
Okay, it's a good question. And let me just say, I'm not, I haven't individually come up with these ideas. The idea that Daniel was not really written by this person, Daniel, was known in the 2nd Christian century. So there have been people for a very, very long time who've known this. And modern scholars have been saying this for over 100 years. And so this is a this isn't my idea. This is just it's a common view. It's a very good question. Are there any real prophecies in the Bible? And yes, there are. The book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is not written about 500 years before Jesus, the way it claims. It was written about 150 years before Jesus, which scholars have known for a long time. It makes predictions about things that were going to happen up to its own time, about how the Babylonians were going to destroy Israel, and then you'd have the Medes, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks. And Daniel predicts that all of these destructions will take place, but he's living after they happened. And so he knows that they're going to happen. So when he predicts them, he's not really predicting them. He's pretending to predict them because he's living afterwards. But then he goes ahead and makes other predictions about what's going to happen, including that the ruler of Syria at the time, Antiochus Epiphanes, the one who's causing all the problems for Israel, is himself going to be killed, that God's going to destroy him too. And that prediction did not happen. So he predicts things coming up to his own day that are correct, but then when he makes future predictions, they don't happen. And so there are predictions like that in the Bible, including in the book of Revelation. I was going to say the author of Revelation is predicting that the Roman Empire is going to be destroyed very soon in his day.
Right. So you said, you just answered the question, are there prophecies in the Bible?
Yes.
Well, the question should have been, are there fulfilled prophecies in the Bible?
Oh, yeah, sure. Just like today, people can predict what's going to happen in, for example, in America and probably in India too, there's a lot of concern about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And there are a lot of people predicting what's going to happen. And some of them are right, and others of them are wrong. And you get predictions in the Bible. You get predictions, for example, that I think Jesus himself predicted that the temple in Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And it was. There were other Jews making the same kind of prediction, that there'd be a war against Rome and Jerusalem would be destroyed. And these people who thought that might happen, it did happen. And so there are predictions then, just as there are predictions now, and some of them happen and some of them don't.
Then the question would be, then there is a thin line between speculation and a prophecy. So do these speculations, I would call them, did they really need a divine intervention to analyze situations? People predict stock market all the time. And for most of them, it comes true, based on which they invest and all that. Can we call them prophecies?
Well, you could, if you were if you wanted to take a theological or a religious view of them. Usually prophecy in a religious context refers to a prediction that God has given the person and it turns out to be true. But I think at least in America today, some people talk about, prophecies without really meaning anything religious about it. And in that case, it really is a speculation. And a lot of speculations about the stock market don't come true, which is why a lot of people go broke.
But so they also come true, right?
Of course, yes, that's the point.
Maybe the percentage differs, but they do
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But if they were given by God, they'd always come true.
Right. Okay. So what about Isaiah 7:14? Isn't that a prophecy for the Mashiach, the Messiah?
No, it's not. It's quite explicitly not. If your listeners don't or viewers don't know, Isaiah 7:14 is the passage where in the New Testament, Isaiah 7:14 is quoted to predict that Jesus will be born of a virgin. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. The problem is that when you actually read the book of Isaiah, it is not predicting a future event about the Messiah. Anyone can read Isaiah 7. Just read the entire chapter, and you'll see what it's about. The term Messiah never occurs in this chapter. It's not predicting the coming of a future king in this chapter. And it's a mistranslation to say that 7:14 says, a virgin shall conceive. When you actually read it in Hebrew, What it says is a young woman has conceived and will bear a son. And when you read it in its context, it's talking about a woman in Isaiah's own day who is already pregnant. And Isaiah is telling the king of Israel that by the time this child is old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, then the political trouble he's having will disappear. That's what he's talking about. And so what people do is they take a verse, Isaiah 7:14, and take it out of its context to make it say something it doesn't say in its context. And what historians have always insisted is that if you read a passage in the Bible, for example, you can't just take the verse out of context. You've got to read it in the context if you want to understand it.
Okay, so let's say Revelation has been misinterpreted, misread, and the end of time and the return of Jesus is not what Revelation is saying. But the point is, if it makes Christians happy and hopeful, why is it a problem? Why do you have to call it out through a book now?
Well, I don't think Christians should be happy about the book of Revelation because the book of Revelation indicates that a lot of Christians are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Being a Christian isn't going to save people. The author, John, attacks Christians in the congregations and indicates that they're going to be punished as badly as everybody else. The reason to call out the book of Revelation is because it is a violent, vengeful, wrathful book that does not encompass the teachings of Jesus himself. Jesus did not believe that God was going to torture people and bring brutal calamities on earth just to punish people. He didn't believe that, and I don't believe it either. I mean, I'm not a believer anymore at all. But the Revelation is not a book about God's love for people. The love of God never occurs. The love of God never occurs in the book of Revelation, and the word hope never occurs in the book of Revelation. It's not a book about hope and love. It's a book about wrath and vengeance.
Not even for Christians?
Yes, because Christians should not think that it's right that God is going to torture people. This is not a God of love. This is a God of hatred. And so Jesus hates people in the book of Revelation. God punishes people in Revelation. God doesn't love anybody. The people who are saved are not those who are loved of God. They're the slaves of God in Revelation. I'm just talking about what Revelation itself says. It calls the people who are going to be saved God's slaves. It doesn't call him, the ones who believe in him.
So, well, if Christians are okay by being called slaves of God, and if they take it to be a privilege to be a slave of God, why should non-Christians have a problem with that?
I think the book of Revelation teaches that God is going to punish everybody who doesn't have a very strict Christian belief. And in Christianity, the followers of Jesus are supposed to be God-like. If you're supposed to imitate God in your life and God tortures people who disagree with him, then that would suggest that you should torture people who disagree, who are against God. And I think that is a very, very dangerous point of view.
You border on humor when you remark about the prophecy writers' shamelessness, their shameless attitude when their predictions fail miserably. You said something like most of us might think that with egg on their face, such prophecy writers would never speak in public again. I'm talking about the prophecies, the failed prophecies about the end of the world that American prophets, so-called prophets, have time and again predicted. So you said that such prophecy writers, we would think, would never speak in public again, but that almost never happens. When the prediction of one date for the end of the world passes, they give another date, write another book, bag a few more TV shows, and make more fortune, and the show goes on. Dr. Ehrman, my question really is not about these fraudsters. Fraudsters will be fraudsters as long as they have naive people who offer themselves to be preyed upon. My question is really about the law of the land. Now, isn't it the prerogative of the United States government to protect gullible people from falling prey to charlatans? So I'm really surprised that the United States, which actually lectures other countries' administrations about treating its citizens right, has failed to bring laws into place to curb these scoundrels and protect the citizens from being cheated of their hard-earned money. What do you have to say about this whole drama being repeated time and again?
I mean, in America, we have all sorts of laws governing freedom. And we have, for one thing, we have a separation of church and state, where the state is not allowed to intervene with religious beliefs unless they are doing things that are illegal. And it's not illegal to predict when the world's going to end. Secondly, we have freedom of speech in this country. We are free to say what we want to say, and that includes religiously as well as politically. And so the government there are no mechanisms within our Constitution to keep people from believing what they want to believe. I don't think that most of these people who are making predictions are fraudsters. I think that they are just generally wrong and don't realize that they're wrong. There are probably some who are out there just to make a buck. But I think that basically they're just really, really wrong. But they have freedom of speech. They can say what they think, just like I can say what I think. If we shut them down, if we tell them, you can't make that prediction, then there's nothing to prevent it if they get in power to shut me down and to say, well, you can't say we're wrong then, or we're going to take you to jail. So we don't have laws about that kind of thing in America. And I'm glad we don't, because if we did, then if the fundamentalists take over the government, they could just throw me in jail. There are restrictions on speech acts, but not very many in America. And we can, so they can say whatever they want. Why not? I mean, just because they're wrong doesn't mean they can't say it.
You said separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the reality is quite the contrary. For example, the National Prayer Breakfast, the yearly event hosted by the members of the United States Congress and organized on their behalf by the Fellowship Foundation, which is a Christian organization. And every president since Eisenhower had participated in the annual event. It was originally called the Presidential Prayer Breakfast and then changed to National Prayer Breakfast. So the Fellowship Foundation is a US-based religio-political organization. So I don't see how separation of church and state that is. Yes, in the Constitution, it is separate, but also take Jerry Falwell, the senior. He's the founder of the largest Christian university in the United States, Liberty University. And he is a conservative politician who even founded a political organization called Moral Majority. And in fact, Christian leaders are now calling more and more Christians to join politics, saying the phrase separation between church and state is not in the Declaration of Independence.
I think people misunderstand what the separation of church and state means in America. In America, the separation of church and state means that the state cannot enforce any religion. It doesn't mean that politicians can't be religious or express their religious views or to use their religious views in order to support certain social or political agenda. It doesn't mean that religious people can't be involved in politics. Separation of church and state means that the government cannot tell me which religion to have. It cannot outlaw Hinduism. It cannot outlaw Christianity. And it can't force me as an atheist to go to church. And so the government cannot enforce any particular religion. It has to be open to all religious expressions. And so a prayer breakfast, if presidents decide to go to a prayer breakfast, that's within their prerogative. This isn't a perfect system. It is absolutely not a perfect system, and it can be abused. and it is abused, just as
I
every
mean, that's
system is
there with
abused.
any country. I would have to.
That's true of any country.
Any
But
country.
the separation of church and state is very important to me personally, because I teach at a state university. My university is supported by the state of North Carolina, and if there were not a constitutional separation of church and state, then the state right now is controlled by very conservative politicians who tend to be conservative religiously as well as politically. And if there weren't a separation of church and state, they could fire me because they don't like what I teach about religion.
No.
I don't think legislating against it is the solution. The solution to it is to teach people the truth so that they don't go after falsehood.
I agree with that part, that you have to educate the people, and that's the sustainable solution to the whole thing. So the second part of that question is, how do they get new converts to the new date they suggest? I mean, how does that happen? What kind of psychology in the lay Christian is at play here?
Well, it's not just Christianity; it's a widespread phenomenon, and it's and I deal with this in my book. So there's a reason for it that psychologists have figured out, social psychologists. There was a book written back in the 1950s called When Prophecy Fails. And it actually wasn't about a religious group per se. It was about a group of people who expected the UFOs to come, that the people from outer space were going to come and rescue us from the world. And the question was, so you have groups like that who expect aliens to come and with their spaceships and take some people out. And you have groups like this. Some of them take their lives, by the way, but they're not illegal groups. But you have these UFO cults. And the study wanted to see what happened when they say, okay, the Martians are going to come on December 21st and take us out of the world, just us. Everybody else will be left, and the world then will be destroyed, but we'll be saved. What happens when December 21st comes and the aliens do not come? And these were psychologists who wanted to figure out, what does the group do when this very concrete belief they have that has made them leave their jobs and commit to it, and what happens when it doesn't happen, when they have a very specific prediction. And what ends up happening is these people are so psychologically disturbed by this that they try to convert other people to their point of view. They reset the date. Oh, we meant March 21st. And they reset the date. And if they convince more people and more people and more people, then they feel like, well, I think I was right all along because so many people agree with me. And so this is a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. You have a cognition, you have a thought that can be shown to be wrong. And when it's shown to be wrong, you experience this dissonance, this idea, like you can't figure this out. But by convincing other people that you were right, it makes you feel you were right after all. Cognitive dissonance, that's the answer.
Right. Yeah. So you said, you talked about martyrdom, author of Revelation, John indicates that the city of Rome was drunk in the blood of Christian martyrs, as if Christians were killed left, right, and center just for being Christians. And you debunk the idea by pointing out that the first time that a governmental authority engaged in persecuting Christians was under the Emperor Nero. And that too, for being troublemakers or for refusing to take part in a community or imperial event. And you also noted that before Nero, Christians may have been persecuted on a local level by some Jews, such as Paul before he converted, and also some non-Jews. And John reports it as if hordes of Christians have been martyred by Roman officials and describes it as the city being drunk with blood of the saints. I would say John is not unique in that sense. Christianity claims Christians have always been on the receiving end of persecution. Well, it's another thing that Christianity never speaks about the races that it annihilated to establish itself. But my question is, why are the tales of martyrdom of Christians so vital to the story of Christianity?
It's a really good question. It's a very interesting question because it's true. I mean, from the very beginning, Christians have talked about how persecuted they are. I think the reason in Christianity in particular is because Christianity is based on the crucifixion of Jesus, and Christians have understood that he was innocent of any crimes, and he shouldn't have been crucified. But it shows that the religion itself is based on a martyrdom, and it's based on a persecution and illicit persecution. And so Christians have always had this idea that they were persecuted. And in the early church, they were often persecuted. They were not often martyred, but they were sometimes martyred. Just as is true today. I mean, there are parts of the world today where Christianity is very seriously persecuted, and there are Christian martyrs till today. But it's a strange phenomenon. I don't know what it's like in India, but in America, of course, the vast majority of people in America are Christian, and conservative Christians have a lot of power in our country right now, and yet conservative Christians feel like they're the ones being persecuted. I have students in my classes who feel they're generally being persecuted as Christians, and I just say, "What are you talking about? You're the ones deciding our politics and our social agenda. You're being persecuted. You've got no idea what persecution is if you think this is persecution." And and it's kind of like in the South. A lot of people. I live in the American South, and which is very conservative, and there's a lot of white nationalism and racism and some awful things down here. And a lot of white nationalists feel like they're being persecuted. What? You're calling the shots. What are you talking about?
Yeah. This question, Dr. Ehrman, is very important from the standpoint of conversions of Hindus in India. And this is one story that sells because it appeals to emotions and human spirituality. And if you know anything about Hindus, they're good people with some strong emotions, and inherently by design, they're spiritual. So they get bought into the martyrdom tales. So, but when you said that Christians have been persecuted, I would have to ask, haven't all other races been persecuted also for their beliefs at some point or the other?
Oh, yeah, probably.
So it's only Christians that make a big deal about their martyrdom. Although when you compare the numbers, they are no way close to how many Hindus have been martyred for being Hindus.
Yeah. So well, I don't know what the numbers are like. I mean, within Judaism, there's a strong sense of persecution and martyrdom because of the way Jews were mistreated throughout the centuries. And so I don't know how martyrdom figures in Hindu discourse, but it certainly is big in both Judaism and Christianity. And
so let's talk about Jesus. From what you said in your book, you say Christ is in charge, and he considers Jews to be Satan-worshipping enemies of his people. So does that mean Jesus considered Jews who worshipped the Father as worshippers of Satan? Is Jesus equating Yahweh to Satan here?
No, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about Jesus. I'm talking about Jesus in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, Jesus in the book of Revelation. Yeah.
Well, Jesus in the book of Revelation. So I'm not talking about the real man, Jesus, or
they're two different people.
Oh my God! Yes, that's my whole point. Jesus himself. I'm talking about Jesus is. When I talk about Jesus, I'm talking about the man who lived in Israel in the 20s of the Common Era, who preached and was crucified by the Romans. That's one thing. The book of Revelation has a different portrayal of who that Jesus was. The book of Revelation's portrayal of Jesus, I'm saying, is completely wrong historically. It's not at all like Jesus was. In the book of Revelation, Christ calls the Jewish synagogue a synagogue of Satan, and Christ hates his enemies, and Christ tortures his enemies, and Christ destroys his enemies. And that's not who Jesus, the historical Jesus, was. That's not who he was. It's the way the book of Revelation is portraying Jesus.
So now we have a competitor to Jesus, and may we expect another wave of evangelism based on the Jesus of Revelation sometime in the near future?
The way I end my book is by talking about how people in my context where I live, everybody has a picture of who Jesus was. And I don't think that there's just two Jesuses in the New Testament. I think each of the Gospels has a different portrayal of Jesus. The Jesus in Matthew is not at all like the portrayal of Jesus in John. And Paul has a different portrayal of Jesus, and Revelation has a different portrayal of Jesus. I think they all have portrayals of Jesus. And I think that your understanding of Jesus, your portrayal of Jesus in your own head, affects, if you are in any sense in a Christian context, it affects how you yourself think you ought to live. And so there are a lot of people, for example, who think that Jesus was a pacifist, and he believed in making peace. And they tend to be pacifists themselves. They tend to be opposed to war and violence. But you have other people who think that Jesus was out to destroy his enemy, as in the book of Revelation. And people like that tend to be in favor of violence for religious reasons. And so I think the way that you imagine Jesus is the way that people who are influenced by Christianity at all, that's the way they live their own lives. And so that's one of the reasons it's important to recognize that the book of Revelation's portrayal of Jesus is not really what Jesus himself was like. I'm teaching a class this semester called Jesus in Scholarship and Film. And we read a bunch of Gospels, the 4 of the New Testament and about 10 from outside the New Testament. And we watch movies produced in Hollywood about Jesus. And each one of these, I show that each one of these has a different portrayal.
Can I join your class, please?
Yes, please. Yes. You'll have to take the final exam, though. It's in a month. It's in 3 weeks.
I don't mind doing that just to attend your class. Okay. So on Jesus. Yeah. So in the preface to Jesus Interrupted, another of my favorite book, you say that the Bible is the most significant book in the history of our civilization. And you repeated the idea in this book also, Armageddon. You say the New Testament is the most important collection of books in the history of civilization. So I presume you mean the Western civilization.
I do.
Yeah, okay. So it's a tad surprising to me that scientifically and technologically advanced West shaped itself on the basis of a book that has nothing specifically scientific in it. And in fact, it defies logic in several aspects. And it is not where you want to draw examples for your judicial or legislative laws. Now, I would say one can imagine such significance of Hindu Shastras in Indian civilization. I mean, such significance of, a book or a set of books shaping the civilization when you can talk about Hindu Shastras. Given that every one of Hindu scriptures is pregnant with scientific ideas that basically shaped Indian, Indo-Iranian, Indo-European civilizations. So help me understand how and why did a logic and science-defying book such as the Bible come to gain such significant place in the West?
Well, modern science and technology developed after the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is an 18th century movement throughout Europe, and that's where modern science really began, with major figures like Bacon and Isaac Newton, et cetera. So the foundations of Western society were built long before there was science. So I absolutely would not say that modern science is based on the Bible or that modern technology is based on the Bible. But our systems of government, our social agendas, especially our social agendas, our culture is deeply rooted in the Bible because it had been around for 1,800 years before our modern culture developed. If modern society, if Isaac Newton had the technology available to him and he lived 1,700 years earlier before Christianity took over the world, then our roots of culture wouldn't be Christian. They'd be Roman, probably, or Greek and Roman in the West. But, as the way things developed, the most powerful institution throughout Western history has been the Christian church. It was the dominant power throughout from the 4th century up until really quite recently. And it determined social agenda and political agenda and how governments were formed. And so it is. And so, but, luckily science during the Enlightenment broke away from the Bible. And that's why we have scientific developments, because even people like Isaac Newton were very, very committed Christians, but they realized to do science, they couldn't allow their Christian beliefs to affect their experiments. And so that's why things developed the way they did. But we still have the residue of Christianity throughout Western culture, at least. Literature, music, art, philosophy, it's all just deeply, deeply rooted in the Christian tradition. And at the heart of the Christian tradition is the New Testament.
Don't you think that's changing now? Or the change has begun some time ago? Deviating from the biblical roots?
Yeah, I think in the West, definitely. And in parts of the West. Throughout Europe, for example, Christianity is not a significant social factor as much as cultural and social factors it was. And in America, a lot of people are moving away from religion altogether to become agnostic or atheist, or they call them over here nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They have no religion. They call themselves nuns. And I think that's a definite move. And the one counterpoint to that is very conservative fundamentalist Christianity and Pentecostal Christianity that you were connected with. Those tend to be still thriving, and they're about the only part of Christianity that's thriving. And I think it's kind of unfortunate, because liberal Christianity, liberal Protestant Christianity, especially, actually has a lot to be said for. I don't subscribe to their beliefs, but the social and political agendas that are promoted by liberal Christians tend to be those that are more enlightened and liberating. And so it's too bad that they're on the decline, but they're on the decline because most people don't believe their religious claims. It's kind of a weird moment, because a lot of people are moving away from religion, but the religious right is determining social and political agendas.
You're right.
And so it's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
So in 200 years, it'd be interesting to see. Unfortunately, I won't be around to see it.
Yeah, but if you were to follow if you would believe the karma philosophy of Hindus, then you would definitely be here. I know I will come back here. So.
Okay. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you. So you drew a distinction between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, implying that Yahweh and Jesus are two different gods. You also implied that Jesus is a wrathful God, and anybody who says he is God of love hasn't read Revelation. I know you've already answered a part of this, but can you explain? You were saying on the one hand that the Jesus of Revelation is different from the Jesus that lived in the 20s of the 1st century. And then you go on to say that anybody who says that Jesus is the God of love hasn't read Revelation. So we're talking about two Jesuses here, right? But then you're saying that people are actually saying that the Jesus who lived in the 20s is God of love.
Yeah, so not exactly. It's complicated. Okay. So what I'm saying is that I would never say that Jesus is a God of wrath. What I would say is that the book of Revelation portrays a wrathful God and a wrathful Jesus. But I don't think Jesus himself is wrathful. I think Revelation.
No, but then that would be a contradiction, right? To the Jesus that was portrayed in the Gospels and the Jesus that is pictured in Revelation. There's a contradiction in the characterization. Yes. And Bible being God's word shouldn't actually contradict in the personality of the hero of the Bible.
No, it shouldn't, but it does. So, I mean, I don't think the Bible's God's word. You mentioned my book, Jesus Interrupted, earlier, and the whole point of that book is that there are contradictions all over the Bible,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and so I don't think you can take the New Testament as a single book. So when I talked about the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament, what I was saying is that people widely say the God of the Old Testament is the God of wrath, and the God of the New Testament is the God of love. And when people tell me that, I say, well, it's not true that the New Testament God is just a God of love, because look at the book of Revelation. He's full of wrath, not love. And it's not true to say the Old Testament is a God of wrath and not love, because there are lots of places in the Old Testament where God is a God of love. The whole point is that these books are not unified wholes. There are different books in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, and they have different views.
I want to conclude by thanking you once again. And this time for making my work of fighting against proselytization of indigenous people of my country easier with your scholarship, with your books, with your videos, debates. Whenever I cite your scholarships in my talk, my critics are quick to point out, but he is a Jesus historicist. And they challenge me to debate with you on the topic of Jesus's historicity. Now, I say there's no room for a debate between you and me. Now, you are a historicist, but your Jesus is not the Jesus that is being sold to the gullible masses in India. In your own words, it's not the Jesus that your mother believes in, or the Jesus of the stained glass window, or the Jesus of the televangelist, or the Jesus proclaimed by the Vatican, the Southern Baptist Convention, or a local megachurch. And to this list, I would like to add, he is not the Jesus claimed to be God by Indian pastors and lay Christians. So your position about Jesus serves my purpose, which is to stop conversion activity. When your position actually helps my purpose, why do I have to invest myself in disproving Jesus's historicity? You have proven that Jesus has no divine nature or godhood. And that position puts you in the same camp as me. Maybe in different rooms, but we are in the same camp. So there's no room for a debate between you and me. And this is what I would like to tell my critics. I mean, there would have been a debate if you had said that Jesus rose from the dead and he is a God for the entire universe, and he's a God for Hindus also, and Hindus need to be converted to Christianity. Then probably we would have had a debate, a scope for a debate. It doesn't matter to me whether he existed or did not exist. It's enough to me that scholars like you have debunked this whole notion of Jesus being a divine being, a God, or even risen from the dead.
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with the term Jesus historicist. I mean, it's strange to me that there's a category for that.
Yeah, when it comes to the historicity of Jesus, there are two groups, historicists and the mythicists. I have taken the myth route because it served my purpose.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I have to say that among scholars, there are not two groups. There are not two groups. I mean, the idea that you would be called a historicist, because I mean, every scholar of the New Testament believes that there's a historical Jesus. This isn't a debate at all.
There are some that don't, like Robert Price. He's a mythicist. From the conversion standpoint in India, it doesn't matter. We don't care whether he exists or not. We are just here to educate the people that Jesus is not needed in India. We have our own God-men. We have our own gods, and we are happy with that philosophy, whatever the Hindu scriptures have taught us. So our job is only to strip Jesus' figure of his divinity that is being sold in India.
I think the best way to do that is to show the problems of the New Testament. I think the best way to do that, because those can be proved. You can prove the problems of the New Testament. And so you don't have to engage in debates that are just pointless.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely don't care whether he exists or he is a myth. It doesn't matter. So as long as scholars like you will come back and say that, well, he is not God, he hasn't risen, he hasn't, he was just a person who was taught to be a Messiah, he got crucified and he died, and that's about it, end of story. That message is enough for us.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Any message to the Indian Christians?
Look, I actually, one of the things I don't like about Christianity is that some Christians insist that they're right and everybody else is wrong, and that if you don't agree with the Christians, then you're going to be tortured in hell forever. That's a terrible teaching of Christianity. Not every Christian has that view. I have many, many Christian friends, good friends, who don't think that at all. You can be a Christian without having that point of view. And I think any religion that holds a dangerous point of view should be opposed. So I'm opposed to fundamentalist Christianity, but I'm not opposed to Christianity any more than I'm opposed to Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam or anything else. People have their religions, but if we don't respect other people's religions, and if we think that we're the only ones who could possibly be right, and that you have to convert everybody, that creates huge political and social turmoil, and I think it's dangerous.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ehrman. It was a pleasure meeting you. After reading about you, reading you, watching you, we finally get to meet. And so thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been very enlightening, and I've enjoyed it very much.
Same here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.